The Disappearing Visitor. From Johan, 25. I am a nurse working at a hospital. The hospital in particular is fairly large. And as a rule of thumb, the larger the hospital, the more deaths occur there. At least, that's what it seems like. I was, like many other young nurses at the time, working the night shift. I will also note I used to be a skeptic, like the majority of folks. But after spending some time in a long-term care facility prior to this event, I started believing in hauntings and spirits. I spent a number of nights seeing darting shadows out of the corner of my eye, hearing strange noises. Not to mention some of the things the residents of the facility told me they saw. But those are different stories. So by the time I was working in that certain hospital, I was already a fairly firm believer in spirits and such. The night this occurred was just like any other. I did my first couple of rounds on my patients, then passed out their medications. By the time I finished with these tasks, it was around 12 or 12:30 in the morning. I decided to go down to our cafeteria to get something to eat before they closed up for the night. Everything went perfectly fine until I had my food. I was heading back up to the break room to eat it. I was walking down the hall behind a fairly young woman, who I assumed to be a visitor of one of the many patients of the facility. Mind you, this was prior to the COVID thing, so visitors were allowed at any hours throughout the night. This lady looked perfectly normal, like you or me. No ghastly features, no see-through body. None of the stuff that you might be expecting. I still remember to this day what she looked like, what she was wearing. She had long, straight hair that was about halfway down her back. She had a blue, soft-looking, almost handmade jacket, and a solid black skirt that went all the way down to her ankles. I naively believed she was just another normal person. But I very quickly found out I was very wrong. As we walked down the hallway, she arrived at the elevator before me. She pressed the call button on the wall to go up to another floor. I quickly walked to try to catch up to her, as to not have to wait on the elevator again. I saw her walk onto the elevator, but as soon as I was in front of the door, she was completely gone. She had vanished. No one was inside the elevator any longer. It was like she did not exist at all, leaving no trace whatsoever, with an open elevator door in front of me, just inviting me in. I didn't feel very comfortable getting on the elevator after that, so I opted to walk around to the other side of the hospital to use a completely different set of elevators. To this day, that is the clearest spirit or apparition I've ever seen. And even though I was not injured by any means, it still makes me glad not to have to work on the night shift anymore. She was asking for help. From Lombanog Girl. This happened back in 2004, at the very first company I ever worked at. The story begins one day when I was on my way to work. Usually I took the office bus, which was provided for us at a certain pickup point, because it was free. That day when we passed by a road that didn't have any structures or people along it, only tall grass, a vacant lot that had been abandoned, there was this nasty smell, and I mean it was rotten, like they had dumped a lot of food and just left it to rot. And I was not the only one who noticed. The other passengers with me noticed it too, because they were covering their noses. When I got to the office, it was the topic of the day. Everyone was talking about this nasty smell on the road. Every day before this, we passed by that road to the office, but only this time had it smelled so rotten. For the next couple of days, the smell started to smell more like a dead rat than rotten food. The city maintenance group was trying to search for where the smell was coming from. But unfortunately, after nearly a week, they still could not find the source. I even joked with my coworkers that the smell was starting to smell like a dead person. They stared at me with fear. One day, we were passing by the smelly road. I was leaning my head on the window when somebody slammed on the glass. I was startled and looked right up, only to see the face of a woman, a bloody face, and yet the bus was still moving. That made my heart nearly stop, but I kid you not, when I blinked, she was gone. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I'd fallen asleep and had a very vivid and spooky dream. I was very tired that day. When I got home, I was too sleepy, and the moment I lay down on my bed, I went right to sleep. However, sleep paralysis took over me. As a note, sleep paralysis had been normal for me since I was about 10 years old. Anyway, during this particular episode, I made the mistake of trying to open my eyes, and it worked. I was taught that if you fall into sleep paralysis, the first thing you should do is try to move your fingers and toes. But instead, I opened my eyes, and I saw her. My bedroom door opened, and I saw her crawl inside, like Sadako crawling out from the TV. And I was thinking, oh God, have I been watching too many Asian horror films? She continued to crawl towards me. I was trying to calm myself, trying to move my fingers and toes now. You see, if I'm in sleep paralysis once I opened my eyes, I cannot get myself to close them back. The only option I had was to do everything I could to wake myself up. As she continued to crawl, she reached my bedside and turned her head towards me. There it was, the very same bloody face that had banged on my window on the bus. I then woke up. I nearly screamed. I felt chills all over my body. The day after that, the smell was gone from that road. When I got to the office, people were talking about the reason for the smell. Apparently, someone had chopped up a woman and shoved her remains into one of the drainage pipes along that road. When my coworker verified it, showing me the news article, it had the photo of the woman. It was the very same face of the bloody-faced woman who had followed me home.
The Judgment Chair Shaker Ghost, from Logic Eraser. I work in a factory located on top of a hill. When I was working the night shift at my workplace, I would always use the meeting rooms during breaks to get some shut-eye. My colleagues, being smokers, were all having the time of their lives in the smoking corner far away, so I was usually the only one left in the building. On numerous occasions, an office chair would start shaking back and forth. After a few nights, I noticed a pattern to it. If I ate biscuits and dropped some crumbs on the floor, the chair would shake. If I dropped trash on the ground, the chair would shake. If I put my 2 feet on the table or on another chair, the chair would shake. One day when the chair started shaking, for the heck of it, I asked the room a question. Is there a ghost here? Shake the chair once for yes, shake the chair twice for no. Immediately after I said that, the shaking pattern of the chair changed. It shook once then stopped. I asked if I should put my feet on the ground. The chair shook once. I then asked if I should put my feet up on the chair. The chair now shook twice. After that, I began asking it a few questions. When I asked if I should leave this room, there was a pause before it shook once. When I asked if I could stay in the room, it shook once too. When I asked if it was haunting this location, the answer was yes. After some time, the ghost was sick of my questions and stopped replying to any of my questions. Ever since that night, every time I entered the meeting room, I would say something like, "Pardon my intrusion," or that I would only be here for a short while. I shared my experience with others in my workplace, and they too said it was a chair that shook for no reason. However, I was the first person to talk to the chair. Unfortunately, this chair-shaking ghost was not the only ghost haunting this location. There are at least 2 other spiritual entities I encountered. These other ghosts were not as friendly as the chair-shaker ghost, but they rarely make their presence known.
She saved her children from no more. This took place almost 40 years ago. On early, crisp, cool, and quiet spring mornings, the memory comes back to me as if it had just happened moments ago. I worked at a daycare center as a daycare teacher. My schedule was the opening shift, where myself and the cook for the daycare would be the only employees present from 5:45 a.m. until 7 a.m. Our daycare opened at 6. We went about our routine of me preparing the main room for the morning arrival of children, while the cook was preparing breakfast. At 6:05, our first 2 children of the day arrived at their regular time. Now, our cook was an excellent cook. I'll refer to her as Chef Brenda. The daycare was filled with the delicious scent of bacon being fried and blueberry muffins being baked. The 2 children, aged 3 and 5, were sitting with me at the dining table, playing with a children's puzzle while waiting for breakfast. It was a routine, normal, peaceful morning. Then, at 6:15 a.m., I heard screaming and shouting close to the front door. I quickly rose from the table to look out the window, which faced the front yard, to see what was going on. But before I could reach the window, the door beside it burst open, and a crying woman came running in, holding a small baby in her arms, and holding the hand of a child who looked about 2 years old. She quickly handed both children to me, then turned back towards the door, running, telling me to lock it and call the police. I stood there, dumbfounded, shocked, for a split second. I then ran to the door and locked it, still holding the baby. The cook had come out of the kitchen when she heard the frantic woman saying to lock the door. So Brenda took the toddler and had him sit at the table with the other 2 children. Moments after locking the door, I heard a man outside yelling, cussing, and a woman screaming. I looked out the window and I saw a man holding a knife in one hand, and the woman, the one who had just run into the daycare, he grabbed her by the hair with his other hand. He had her face to face with him as he pulled her head back. She was screaming and crying, begging him to stop. They were only about 6 feet away from the daycare. I ran to the director's office to call the police. Brenda gathered all the children and took them into a classroom in the back of the building. She put on a VHS sing-along tape to distract the children and to drown out the sound of what was going on outside. I was a terrified, nervous wreck. I was worried about the woman and the parents and children who would arrive at the daycare shortly at about 6:30 a.m. Would they walk right into this dangerous situation? I was soon on the phone with the police dispatcher when I heard a gurgled, sharp scream, which had to have come from the woman outside. I then heard the man yelling,
"Open the door! Give me my kids!"
Then I heard glass break. I peeked out of the office door, which was only a few feet away from the entrance. The entrance door had a small rectangular-shaped window, and the man had broken it. He was now trying to reach the handle to unlock the door from the inside. Thank goodness he could not reach the latch. I let the dispatcher know what he had done, and she informed me that the police were coming on the scene right now. 30 seconds later, I heard it.
"Drop the knife!"
Then I heard officers arresting the man. An officer soon asked, through the broken window, how many people were inside. I told him 2 adults and 4 small children. He told us to stay put, and that an officer would come in soon and talk to us. With all of this going on, I hadn't realized that the breakfast had burned. I rushed to the kitchen to turn everything off. I then called the daycare director and I told her about what happened. After I hung up, I went to the cabinet. I grabbed a box of graham crackers and apple juice, as well as some cups. I took them to the back classroom to give the children something to eat. The infant that the woman brought in looked to be about 3 months old and was now sleeping in Brenda's arms. The toddler looked to be about 2. They were both wearing footy pajamas, looking like they were well loved and cared for at home. I heard loud knocking at the main door. I went to open it for the officers. 3 of them came into the daycare. 1 was a detective. The detective asked me if I was the one who called the police, and I said yes. He asked about what happened and requested that I describe the woman who ran in with the kids. I told him everything I witnessed. He then asked to see the woman's children. I went and got them from the back room. Afterwards, I took them back to Brenda and came back to the officers. I had a feeling in my gut, though, the entire time, that their mother was dead. It was the look on the faces of the policemen when they looked at her children. Eventually, the detective confirmed my fears. Their mother was dead, right in front of the daycare. He then asked if there was a back way out of the building. I told him about the back door leading to the fenced-in playground, and that I could unlock the fence. We tried to shield all the children from the scene as we left the daycare. The woman's body was still there where she died. We went into the police cars. The officers had me contact the parents of our 2 daycare children and have them picked up at a nearby store. That woman's children were going to be picked up by the Child Protection Agency until other family members were located. I found out through local news that the woman and man were husband and wife and had moved to the neighborhood where the daycare was located 2 weeks before. They lived 6 houses down from the daycare center. The husband had gotten high and drunk the previous night and began to beat the wife, threatening to kill her, their children, and then himself. She must have run to the daycare to save her babies and did everything she could to keep them safe by running back into danger to steer her husband away and give me time to lock the door. Her husband ended up dying in prison of natural causes 10 years later, after being convicted and sentenced to 20 years for murder. I quit my job a month after the murder. I was too scared, nervous, sad. I kept thinking about the mother being killed, hearing her killer trying to get into the daycare, seeing the blood on the walkway in front of the daycare where she had been killed, seeing the blood on the door from his arm being cut from the window when he tried to reach in. It took a week of scrubbing to get all the blood out, and the door had to be replaced. This new door had no window in it, but it still reminded me of that horrible day. I always wonder about her children. The last I heard about them was that their aunt, the mother's sister, had adopted them. Sinking feeling from Nightfly. I'd been a museum tour guide for the better part of 4 years. We had several exhibits pass through monthly. It was late October of 2022. We had just hosted our haunted exhibit. It included things like crime scene photos, bricks from a local insane asylum, murder weapons, haunted objects, mirrors with handprints and faces in them, and a newly loaned face familiar to many horror and ghost fans, Robert the doll. I myself did not believe in anything paranormal. In fact, I found it abhorrent how people easily bought into that, so I was the only tour guide willing to work on the Robert exhibit. He was just a creepy-looking old doll, dressed in a sailor suit, with oddly lifeless blank eyes. He was encased firmly in glass with pressure-sensitive devices, in case anyone got any bold ideas. I mean, he was a famous doll. He was open to viewing every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and the weekends. So I often did the closing shift, staying mostly in that room. I had to warn people not to take pictures and to not ask beforehand, simply so we wouldn't be held liable and per one of the conditions of the doll being loaned to us for the month. Every time I would have to say, "Please ask before you take pictures of Robert. It has been claimed that he causes accidents and heart attacks." When I had to say that, I fought not to roll my eyes. How could one being, let alone a creepy old doll, cause accidents or deaths? It seemed very silly, and the look of fright in people's eyes seemed so unjustified. When there was nobody around, oftentimes I found myself openly staring at the doll, sometimes tossing challenges at him. "If you really haunted Robert, do something. I don't believe half the crap they say you can do." I would come into work sometimes to see him leaned against the glass, or his position adjusted, and I would figure it was a coworker messing with me. So I would disarm the sensors, fix him at least twice a week before I started the first shift of the day. It was getting closer to Halloween, and for profit, the museum hosted a seance with Robert as the star guest. Needless to say, everyone seemed to have a good time. I don't know if it was a setup, but I happened to be the one in the room that night. Knocks, things being thumped on, lights flickering, whispered voices, growls, and things moving were endless that night. We had dozens of participants, and they were all flabbergasted and swore to being still and silent. I didn't buy it. When everyone was focused solely on the doll and the responses, I walked around, checking for speakers, devices, looking closely at people's feet to see what was really going on. The director was there at the time and seemed really pale, so I had to guess that this had nothing to do with him. And I couldn't find any devices. I was rather puzzled and somewhat flustered. I was really starting to feel paranoid when I suddenly felt something playing with my hair. I was startled and quickly looked over to the doll. Robert was now leaned against the glass, staring right at me. I was shocked. Just a few moments ago, he was positioned away from me. He had been facing the seance table. I was ashamed to say that I left the room and went home immediately after, telling my boss that I just felt sick. On the way home, I narrowly avoided a truck barreling down the side road that ran into the main road, which I turned down to go home. If I hadn't slammed on the brakes in time, I would have been involved in a really bad crash. I went home shaken, and I put in for a vacation shortly after, determined to not have to see that doll ever again.
The trash can from Anonymous. This incident happened pretty recently, so I have to keep details to a minimum for security reasons. I just moved here and got a job as a housekeeper at a hospital. I wanted a fresh start and to move on from my bad past and abusive family. Everything was going great until this day. But anyway, I really like the job. Meeting the patients, cleaning their rooms, and getting to know them. I love it. So back to this day. I was cleaning the restrooms. I was in the men's restroom that is right next to the women's, and my stomach just felt sick. Something felt wrong, but I blew it off and kept cleaning, when all of a sudden, I see a woman with a backpack run into the women's bathroom, throw her backpack in the trash, and she ran off. I called after her, telling her she can't leave it here, but she just kept running. I went into the woman's bathroom and looked at the bag. It was wet on the bottom and had a weird smell. Me being dumb and not calling for security, I put my gloves on and opened the bag slowly, and boom, I saw a blue, purple newborn baby. In panic, I took my scrub shirt off, grabbed the baby out of the bag, and started doing soft compressions on their chest. I wrapped the baby in my shirt and ran to the nurse's station. Everything is a blur and still doesn't feel real. I went up to the nurse's station and calmly, in shock, I said, I need help. Please, with tears running down my face, and the baby in my bra, not to mention. The nurses rushed over, asking me all sorts of questions. Where did I get this baby? When did I find the baby? I just stood there in shock, still rubbing the baby's chest and softly pushing. They grabbed the baby and started working on the baby. There was a huge swarm of people around me and the baby. Eventually, security showed up, asking me all sorts of questions, and said, they have police coming to ask me questions. All I could think of was the baby, so I kept asking them if the baby was okay. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound. The baby started crying. I stood up and asked if I could see the baby, and they told me not yet, because they still need to check them out and make sure they are okay. I had police and my boss ask me questions, but I don't really remember them. Everything was a huge blur. Eventually, they told me the baby was okay, and they took her to the NICU. I remember I went back to my cot and started to mop the floor in the men's bathroom, and my boss grabbed me by my shoulders and told me to go home, and gave me another scrub shirt. I put it on and called my boyfriend. All I could say was, I really need you to pick me up as fast as you can. While I was waiting for him, I went outside and sat on the ground, just touching the grass, staring into nothing. He showed up, got out of the car, and was panicking because I was covered in blood and other stuff from the baby. I told him I was okay, kissed his cheek, went home, took a shower, and got a call from my boss checking in on me. He told me to take the week off and that the police would be in contact with me for more questions. I know, this story sounds a lot like the teen mom and her mother that threw her baby in the trash at the hospital. I know, what a coincidence. I promise I'm not copying the story. This really happened, and I'm still really messed up about it in the head. I still get really nervous to go in the bathrooms or look into the trash cans. One of the nurses did give me an update on the baby. She told me the baby girl is fine, and she was lucky I found her. And she said I helped keep her heart pumping by my small rubs and compressions I did. I gave her a hug and thanked her for telling me. The world is a crazy but beautiful place. Stay safe out there, and keep your eye out for crazy people. Thank you for listening to my story. Have a good one.
Snowboarding accident. From So Nora. One day at work, me and a couple of coworkers were lounging lazily outside, smoking during a break. One of my younger coworkers told us this story that his dad told him, as it had happened in the last couple of years. He explained that his father did some type of work involving checking and diagnosing power lines for problems with electricity. At the time, he was working at a popular ski resort, just a little ways up the hill out of our small historic town. On the evening of the incident, one of these ski lifts was out of order, so he was called at near dark to go check and follow the power lines to find the problem. So he set out, equipped with a flashlight to go check it out. After checking a couple of poles and following the lines, he sat down for a break before going on. Once his break was over, he switched on his flashlight so he could see through the falling snow and dark. In the snowbound silence, he made his way to the next pole, following the nearly invisible power lines against a black sky. As he approached the next pole, he noticed an odd shadow behind it, dancing in the swaying beam of his flashlight. At first, he really wasn't sure what it could possibly be. But as he got closer, he began to get a feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach. That feeling grew as he started to realize what he was looking at was a pair of legs, sticking straight up out of the snow at the base of the power pole. One leg was still attached to a snowboard, but the other leg was free of the board and bent at an angle. Nothing moved. There was only the stillness and silence of the snow slowly falling around him. He wondered for a few seconds what, or if, there was something he could even do to help the victim. He ran up to the site. He tried to save the victim by digging them out by hand. He dug and dug furiously and panicked, only to realize as he dug down enough to expose half the body that he was far too late to save them. He's not sure how long he just sat and cried, helpless to do anything. Eventually, he got up, and he went to inform the necessary people of the grisly discovery. The staff had already known whom he'd found, too. Apparently, earlier that day, a family had reported their daughter missing to the ski resort staff after she had left the group to catch the ski lift to go boarding back down. When she failed to return after a couple of hours, they were beginning to worry. That worry turned to terror after over 8 hours had passed. What apparently happened was that on her way down the hill while snowboarding, she seemed to have noticed the power pole a little too late. She tried to stop, but she fell headfirst into a hollow hole that had formed at the base of the power pole. Unable to dig herself out from being upside down, she eventually suffocated. She had managed to yank one foot loose from the binding on the snowboard in her desperation. That was the most terrifying part to me, the obvious sign of a struggle before a very panicked death. Officer's warning from Jordan B. I work the graveyard shift in a prison. In this prison, the inmates I work with have all been classified as SMI, also known as severely mentally ill. Some of these individuals are high functioning, but some are very, very low functioning. Some are in for a petty crime and others for extremely severe crimes that I won't even mention here. With the time I've spent as an officer, I've seen a lot of things, ranging from minor accidental self-inflicted wounds to fights, riots, and many deaths, most of which were due to old age. Prisons are a hotbed for paranormal activity, especially at night. This makes sense, of course, if ghosts stick around due to things like unfinished business, guilt, rage, or other reasons. Then it isn't very surprising that we deal with a lot of them. Folks from every shift all have their own stories. Most of us have bonded over dealing with the same ghosts, doing the same things. I've honestly become numb to the usual bumps throughout the night, but occasionally I do get spooked when something more than the usual does happen. About a month ago, I was working in one of the houses that held our more high-functioning inmates with a good buddy of mine. We'll call him Officer V. It was well past lights out for the inmates, and most of them were asleep. Officer V and I were monitoring the cell cameras, chatting about random things that didn't pertain to work at all. 2 a.m. rolls around, and the knocking begins. The knocking was coming from the back electrical room that is completely closed off. In order to access this room, you need a special key that is stored in a lockbox with the supervisors. These knocks started off quiet, in sets of 3. Officer V and I were so used to this occurrence by now that we just ignored them and kept talking. About an hour passed, and the knocking got more rapid and loud. I think we both jumped completely out of our chairs, but then the knocking just stopped. We sat back down. Looking around, we saw it. A grayish human figure walking past the outside of our front door toward our Alpha Run and a completely different housing unit. We both froze in place, our eyes locked together as if we both wanted to ask, "Did you see that?" After a moment of silence, I finally found my voice and I asked that exact question. "Did you see that too?" Officer V gave a nervous laugh. I saw it too." He then stood up. "I need to do a security check on all the inmates," he said, leaving the control room. I watched as he went to check on all the sleeping inmates, first on Charlie Run, then Beta. But when he got to Alpha, he had to initiate what we call an ICS. This stands for Incident Command System. Its purpose is to get resources and responses when an incident occurs. Officer V initiated it because one of the inmates was having suicidal ideations. This is common for an SMI yard. What isn't normal is that another ICS happened, not even 10 seconds after the one Officer V called. An inmate was having seizure-like symptoms in the next house over, in the same direction as our Alpha run, and in the same direction the figure had been moving. I was left alone in our house for a bit after this. The figure did return, and it stood at the end of Alpha Run. It stood there and watched me until right before Officer V came back. As it was standing there, my radio, or what some might call a walkie-talkie, went from having a full battery right to a dead battery within seconds. I haven't seen the figure since that night, but every time I have to work that house, I get that unsettling feeling of being watched. We still don't know if this being caused the accidents, or if it was just trying to warn us. Either way, we know to immediately check on our inmates if we ever see it now.
Persecution from To Hell and Back. In 2019, I took my first official job as a high school English teacher. An easy Google search will reveal where. As it's known as the most haunted city in South Africa. I was 24 at the time, and excited to get out and be a real adult for the first time in my life. A few context clues before we get started on the story. 1. The most affordable accommodation I could find was a suite in a women's dormitory of a school for children with severe special needs. 2. This was not the school I taught at. 3. The school I taught at was a small, severely fundamentalist Christian public school that frequently had to rely on the law to manage the disciplinary infractions of its students. 4. It quite quickly became clear to me that there was no one there at all interested in helping me or even listening to what I had to say. This included my unwitting roommate. 5. Despite the following account, I remain a healthy skeptic to this day, more likely to look for logical explanation to odd occurrences than immediately jump to the supernatural. This story simply cannot be explained by anything logical that I've found. So, let's get into it, shall we? The first thing that I noticed was the heat. Now, this city is one of the hottest places in the country, but somehow, it's always 5 to 10 degrees hotter in my suite, at all times. This made sleep and existence in this room practically impossible. But as a young teacher with a barely livable salary, I had no other choice. More exhausting still, however, was one of the other tenants, an older woman who may for reasons I may never understand, thought it her duty to convert me. At this point, I'd finally begun to shake off, officially, the yoke of Calvinistic Christianity, under which I was raised, out from under my blindly believing family. I was finally free to make up my own mind, and all my introspection led to one clear conclusion. I cannot subscribe to something as illogical, flawed, and dangerous as organized religion. That stuff's more addictive than crack, and just as hard to get clean from. My point being, this woman seemed to smell this on me, and would begin actively waiting for me in places she knew I'd be, to spread the good word. It took me being mean beyond my means to get her to back off finally. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After the heat, it was my front door. You see, this school and its facilities were severely underfunded. This means that maintenance on the building was practically non-existent. You needed something replaced or fixed? Forget about it. One such maintenance issue was the latching on the doors. They simply wouldn't latch. The only way of keeping your doors shut was to lock them. So, I fell into the habit of doing this quite quickly. Not a little in part because God's most devoted had zero compunction about banging my door open to come visit. And through her nonsense and the unbearable heat in my room, and my constant exhaustion and dehydration, I needed to get at least some work done for my students. This all became moot, though, when my door would still sometimes just swing open. I would make a point of locking it and leaving my key in the lock to make sure it wouldn't be unlocked from the outside, and it would simply still open by itself, unlocked and without the handle turning. Never when I tugged on it or checked the integrity of the lock, but by itself at odd intervals, especially at night. Sure, when it really began to get insane for me was when things started going wrong at school too. I had an incident in my classroom involving one student trying to beat up another with a brick, and me unthinkingly stepping between them to attempt to de-escalate the situation. Not only did I get my one leg bashed up pretty badly, but the principal gave me a disciplinary action for stepping in, instead of calling the school disciplinarian. Cool. I'll just let the kids beat each other to bloody pulps with masonry in the future, while I run around looking for some guy that's barely ever where he's easily locatable. Understood. That same day I noticed the first cross. Well, a crucifix, drawn upside down on the wall above my bed. This is where I should make a few admissions, dear listeners. The main reason for my skepticism isn't because I'm some big proponent for logical thinking above all else, or because I have some deep understanding of the machinations of the world. I used to be a severely sick person before my ADHD and autism were diagnosed. My panic disorder frequently got the better of me and made me highly irrational. It got bad enough that I developed psychosis, and hallucinations were not beyond the scope of my brain's attempts. To alleviate the insistent onslaught of anxiety I had to deal with every second of every day were not beyond the scope of my brain's attempts. To alleviate the incessant onslaught of anxiety I had to deal with every second of every day. For this reason, it was way easier for me to believe my own insanity, rather than anything tangibly odd or outside the ordinary. I couldn't even bring myself to completely rule out my door randomly opening being a dysfunction of my thoughtfulness, despite triple checking it every time I locked it. So, when the first upside-down crucifix appeared, I was more than comfortable chalking it up to stress-induced psychosis and leaving it at that. I just wish that's where it stopped, but alas. On another day, after the third crucifix had appeared, this one painstakingly scratched into the anti-glare film on my suite's solitary window. My school received a call in which I was being accused of being an incorrigible devil worshipper with an utter disdain for God and all he stood for. Logic, right? I don't believe in Christianity, so I must worship the devil. Like Mr. Lucifer isn't the Christian villain. Why would I believe in the villain if the entire story doesn't strike my fancy? Anyway, it was my neighbor, Miss Head of the Jesus fandom, rebuting after I told her I was crazy enough without needing to add another voice in my head to the mix. God can take a long walk of a short pier. Like I said, cruelty beyond my means. I've never had anything against religion as a concept. My family are all staunch believers and find great comfort in going to church and reading their Bibles. I support them 100% and will gladly go to church with them when they ask. I just don't believe them myself. But by this point, I'd gotten really sick of this woman on top of everything else. I was, in fact, starting to believe all the weird stuff happening to me was her doing. She seemed the type. She was highly irrational on a good day and actively sat waiting for me for hours outside my suite just to give me another sermon on why her faith was the one universal truth. I was considering filing a restraining order. That is, until my stuff started disappearing and reappearing in different places instantly. First, it was water bottles. Like I said, I live in a constant state of dehydration from being so hot and sweaty all the time. so I often drink up to 3 liters of water a day, just to keep up with all the fluid I was losing. But I'd put my bottle down beside my bed before immediately reaching for it again and finding nothing, only to look up and see it sitting 4 meters away on my little table. I was once lesson prepping, and a binder full of model lesson plans and worksheets and such slid off my lap and onto the floor, where I could hear it clatter to the linoleum, only for me to have looked down at it. Not a second later to find the entire thing gone. Even the loose sheets of paper piled on top of it that I was using for reference would have vanished into thin air. Glancing up to check my surroundings, I found it sitting, closed and with all the papers returned to their correct plastic sleeves, on my nightstand. Then there was the fire. Along with a new job comes taking over some of the financial responsibilities your parents took on when you were a child. One of these was my phone. At this point, I couldn't afford a new phone. Instead, I was living between 2 old broken phones that I kept alive on a month-by-month basis as they, rightfully so, tried to finally move on to the great tech paradise of the universe. Mars, right? That's the one completely inhabited by robots. Anyway, one of the things I had to watch out for with one of these phones was overheating. So, since my room was already a sauna, I could only charge my phone there for a little bit, to give it enough juice for the alarm to wake me up the following morning. Then, I would take it with me to continue charging it at school, where it was much cooler. One night, I woke up to severe pain in my right hand. My eyes flew open, and I sat up with a start, taking in the foul-smelling blaze raging on my area rug, which had begun to burn my hand. I'd forgotten to unplug my phone, and it had been burnt so badly. It caught fire. Freaking out, I took one of my precious bottles of clean water. You cannot drink the tap water in most of this country, and most people either pay for filtered water refills at grocery stores or have water filters installed in their homes, and attempted to douse the flames. But when I turned around, the fire was gone. The smell still filled the room, but I realized then it smelt sulfurous, not really like burning plastic or battery discharge. Plus, the phone was still burnt out, with visible scorch marks and bubbles where the casing had begun to warp from the heat. But lying there in the center of my area rug, it was the only thing damaged. My rug didn't have a mark on it. After this, sleeping in that room became impossible. I was exhausted at work. My teaching was suffering. My department head hated me, and it became clear I wasn't going to be able to stay at that school much longer. Calling my parents proved fruitless. They only told me to tough it out and ask for help from management, which they wouldn't hear wasn't helping me in the slightest. So, trust me when I tell you in my vulnerable state, I had completely given over to my mental illness. I believed I was crazy, useless, beyond help, and I was spiraling towards a very dark place indeed. That's when the scratching started. It was never quiet or gentle. It sounded like there was an animal in my closet, desperately trying to get out. Now, something a lot of people don't talk about is how the coolness under pressure aspect of ADHD, especially untreated ADHD, can hinder just as much as it can help. When I first started hearing the scratching, I was too depleted to move to check it out. Walking from my bed to my front door winded me. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I felt completely isolated and alone. I had no sanctuary anywhere. My family lived 800 kilometers away, but when I would open my closet door at other times, recalling the scratching, I would definitely find scratch marks in the wood, always in the part of the closet for hanging clothes, a little higher than my eye level of 164 centimeters, or 5'4", but never high enough to be level with a crossbar. One night, after coming home from a work event, the scratching was already going when I let myself into my suite. Without blinking, I yanked open the door, foregoing turning on my lights, and plunged my hand into the void of darkness inside. Some kind of shadowy thing came out to greet me though, like a massive black finger with a claw for a nail, and scratched my arm. Despite never scarring, I still have that scar to this day, even though my burn scars from the fire have since faded. I yelped and pulled my arm back, slamming the door shut. I slept with my suite's door open that night. I slept with my suite's door open that night, letting the hall light spill inside. The scratching did not cease once. Finally, the day came when I tendered my resignation from that school. My brother was coming to load up my furniture the next day, and I was going home. I felt so relieved. I can't describe it, even now. Unfortunately, at this point, I have to share one more tidbit about this dormitory I temporarily called home. It did not have working showers or baths. All the showers poured brown sludge instead of water. In fact, the building frequently did not even have water. I was showering at the gym and feeling disgusting the rest of the time. As this was my last night there, however, I already cancelled my gym membership and needed a wash pretty badly. Packing up that sweltering cesspool of a room had left me filthy, and we had received a notification text from the matron that day that one of our baths was fully functional, and we had received a notification text from the matron that day that one of our baths was fully functional. So, I put together my bath things, got undressed, wrapped myself in a towel, and set off down the hall to the bathroom, excited to freshen up, go to sleep, and leave this place as soon as possible. Naturally, as luck and ADHD would have it, I forgot to bring a plastic pitcher with which to wet my hair for shampoo. So, my dumb ass failed the white girl in a horror movie test when I leaned back and slowly submerged my entire body underwater. It was instantaneous. The 2 spots of pressure on my chest came on almost predictably. Opening my eyes, I could clearly see there was no one there. I was completely alone, and yet something was pressing down on me, keeping me underwater. I'd taken quite a big breath before going under, though. So instead of losing my mind and thrashing, I decided to see if I could wait it out. I could. The pressure went away a moment later. When I sat up to grab my shampoo and finish my bath, both my toiletries bag and my towel were gone. Vanished. Nowhere to be seen. My brother found them the next day, when we lifted and carried out my couch from my room. A couch, mind you, that I lifted up and searched under myself the previous night, when I'd scoured my room to try to find my lost things. It was as I handed over my keys to the matron, and she asked me how my stay had been, that I'd felt free enough to discuss my ordeal. Something in her tone gave me pause. Did the previous occupant of that room report anything strange? I asked her, my brother honking his horn impatiently for us to go. It was fair. We had quite a journey ahead of us. I wouldn't know. It was before my time, the matron answered, not unkindly. I frowned. How long have you been here? 15 years, she answered with a hint of pride. Let me tell you this, though. Did the crosses show up? Suddenly, despite it being 42 degrees out, finally, despite it being 42 Celsius out, I felt ice cold. Crosses? She nodded slowly. When I was new, the previous tenant of your room had just left. The matron before me had been showing me around, and we found the door to your room ajar. Now, the old woman was as formidable as they come, which she need to be in our line of work, but even she wouldn't set foot inside that place. She said there was something dark in there, something inhuman. From where we stood, we'd watched as a crudely drawn, upside-down crucifix slowly faded from one wall. It was then that I recalled not seeing as many of the crosses over the last few days. As though whatever presence I'd been sharing my space with had known I was leaving. Over the course of my 3-month stay, there had been about 8 crosses in various places throughout the room. Some looked like they had been drawn with fatty, dirty fingers on the wall, while others, like the one on my window and on my closet door, had been scratched into each surface. Now, I wouldn't have known how to explain any of that to my brother, so I'd been quite worried about him coming to help me move. But as the matron told her story, I realized I didn't recall seeing the crucifix on my closet door or the one above my room's light switch at any point during my brother and I's comings and goings from the room for the move. I hadn't answered her about the crosses, but I did mention how it probably would be a good idea not to let people live in that suite anymore. She'd only nodded sagely before wishing me luck for the future. As we'd put that city in the rearview mirror, it was like coming out of a long illness. I could suddenly breathe again, and the world had color and life. I don't know what that thing was, the supernatural, or just a severe bout of mental illness. You be the judge. All I do know, though, is I'd never experienced anything like that before or since. Take care of yourselves, everyone.